Well, welcome to Mental Stillness Podcast, and I have a great guest today. I'm excited to introduce you to, and so Jon Gore is with us. So welcome, Jon Gore.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Derek.
Early on, when I was thinking about kind of lining up some guests, Jon came to mind pretty quick, and you'll find out why after you hear from him and hear a little bit of his background and his experience. And so he has a ton to offer. And so because of that, I'm going to hand it off to him as soon as possible, just to hear a little bit. So Jon, before we jump into the topic at hand today, I'd love to just share with everybody a little bit about who you are, where you're from, what your background, professional background is.
Sure. So I was born in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and was there from birth to through college. So I went to the University of Michigan, studied psychology there. I then moved to Ames, Iowa, to Iowa State University, where I got my master's and doctorate in social psychology.
So you're a big Caitlin Clark fan.
Well, yes. And also happy that Michigan did so well.
Okay.
Yes. I'm my obligatory championship shirt that I got.
There you go. Exactly.
Right after that, I moved to Kentucky. So I am at Eastern Kentucky University. I am associate chair of the psychology department, and I am a full professor. I've been here. Next year will be my 20th year. So I've been here for quite a while.
Yeah. So Kentucky feels like home now, right?
It's almost beaten Michigan for the longest place I've lived. Yes.
Okay. That's great. And yeah. Jon and I've crossed paths a lot over the years. And so I know just with the his expertise in this area of psychology. And there's a lot of listeners here that are in leadership that can benefit from this discussion. And so before we jump into that, I guess can you explain a little bit of the difference? I know that probably this comes up a lot in your world where people probably think you do what I do and people think I do what you do. The difference between psychology and psychotherapy. And so I guess can you share a little bit just about that difference for our listeners?
Yeah, so I have no business being a psychotherapist. So a lot of people assume that psychology is all therapy, but psychology has a major branch of it is research-based. So social psychology and cultural psychology are research branches of psychology. And social psychology focuses on how we influence and are influenced by the people around us. So that can be the immediate people around us, that could be our culture, that could be media, that could be any human interaction that influences the way that we think, feel, and behave. So social psychology is really summed up a lot like that.
Yeah, that's really good. And how many people find out what your field is, and then all of a sudden they think that you're reading their mind as a psychologist?
That happens sometimes. A lot of people think it's sociology, which is kind of similar but not quite the same. And there's some overlap there, but not quite. But yeah, as far as just reading people's minds, it's like, we don't do that. We don't do that. We have to assess you first, and then I can tell you lots of things about you. That's it.
Yeah. Well, and it's I know on my side of things, like we're always it's the researchers like yourself that allow us to really be successful in what we do. I mean, you guys put in the work and are skilled in that sense and spend years and years researching, and just the data that produces is remarkable. I mean, we all want to be evidence-based. And so we don't just want to be out here firing from the hip when it comes to, people's psychological needs. And so
that's right.
Last question, as a professor, I've always wondered this when I went through school through the years of, how many of the professors actually go to ratemyprofessor.com and look at the student ratings?
A really, really funny story about that. I don't know how many. I'll give you my first answer.
You can do a research project on it.
Yeah. I've popped in there once or twice. It's usually not very updated, and it's not as thorough as our course evaluations that we normally do. It's just kind of fun. But many years ago when it first came out, one of our professors said, I have a great hotness rating on my rate my professors. So one of the other professors kind of prodded his students. It's like, all right, we got to out hot him with my stuff. So all of his students were saying stuff on like, oh, he is so hot. It's so hilarious.
That's amazing.
Just, yeah, he's great sense of humor, great camaraderie in our department. That's very special and not something that comes easily necessarily. When we have
Mm-hmm.
over 20 people in our department, it's very much herding cats when you have professors. But we all get along and we all really support each other. So it's a
Yeah.
great place to work.
Yeah. Yeah. Bribing the students to give you the rate my professor rating. I love that. Right. My favorite part is when people will, they slap their name on there, right? They're like, here's what I think, here's how I feel. Like, I
Yep.
would maybe do that with an Amazon product in a review because I'm never going to have to look these people in the eye. But
Hmm.
when they put their name on it, it just always made me laugh. So, um, well, I know with one of your key areas is this idea of culture. And so I want to start there if you're okay with that.
Sure.
You spent a lot of years studying this, and so um, the listeners of this podcast are a lot of business leaders. There's people who day in and day out, if they're listening to something like this, it's hard for me to imagine that they're phoning it in. Listening to the content on psychology and leadership. I mean, it's people who really do want to move the needle in their organization and their influence. And so, here's my first question. And so, what are the key ingredients to a healthy culture?
Mm. So here's the thing that you first have to understand, and especially if your employees and clientele and personnel are multicultural, so coming from multiple cultures, is your workplace culture is often nested within culture with a capital C, right? American culture or Chinese culture or German culture, or whatever you want to, wherever you are. So you want to consider carefully how much is your workplace culture feeding from or informed by the bigger cultures that are coming into your workplace culture. Having some cultural competency about what people value and how interested they are in meeting the cultural standards where they come
Mhm.
from is really important. There's actually a documentary, and if you don't have Netflix, might be able to get it. But there's a documentary that I encourage anyone with any sort of leadership aspirations with multicultural groups. It's called American Factory. If you've never seen it, it's about a Chinese company starting up a factory in Ohio, and it's a really great way to see how there's a lot of cultural clashing going on because the Chinese company is running the factory as a Chinese cultural factory, but the Ohioans, so Midwestern, industrial belt Americans, are not taking to that as quickly as the company leadership would hope they would, and seeing that these things work in Chinese contexts is not working in these American contexts. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a spoiler that the Chinese factory ends up kind of going completely robotic at the end because they can't make
Oh
this
wow.
work. So this goes several ways, right? This goes where American companies are hiring international employees, and like I said with the American factory situation, international companies starting businesses, organizations in the United States. But a lot of times it might be an organization within the United States, but because the United States is multicultural, you have to factor in not just what we sort of default to as ethnic cultures, but regional cultures as well.
Mm.
So Appalachia is a rich regional culture that many organizations in this area would need to consider. What are the values in Appalachia, and are you meeting those values? Are you creating a workplace culture that allows those values to be expressed and to be followed? So I think anyone starting an organization cannot just assume they can just stick it wherever and have whoever work there without doing some homework of what do people value, and are those values in line with what the the organization's values and the leadership's values? Because otherwise you're going to have a really hard time navigating through all that, and even sometimes communicating that. A lot of times people from cultures, the values are so ingrained that you assume there's no other way of thinking. So in the United States, here's an example. Why is it important to be happy? Why is
Hmm.
it important to be happy? Um, we think of happiness as sort of a be all end all thing so often that we can't think of why anyone would want to be otherwise, right?
Mhm.
Why you would want to sacrifice happiness for anything. So it's hard for us to articulate that, but we live our lives that way. It's so ingrained in what we do and what we value. So it's hard to understand why someone might sacrifice personal happiness for something else, like uh, group success, whereas in other cultures, that's a sign of maturity.
Mm.
And you would be expected to sacrifice happiness for group success as a functional adult. So you can see how not taking that into consideration can cause a lot of friction if people value different things. Um, so I would say, like, as a general workplace culture advice, I would say um, make sure that you are aware of what everyone values, not just personally, but culturally. And does your workplace culture and workplace environment support that or not?
Mm.
And if it doesn't, and it's not necessarily that anyone's wrong, it's just that's just not a good fit. It's just not a good fit for the employees and leadership and the organization. So you just have to take a really good long look and hopefully a good valid assessment of people's values and how they're approaching their work. And another thing that
Mhm.
I think that is a cultural difference is um, some people view work as I am here for a paycheck. It is not here. I am not here to gain purpose. I get purpose elsewhere. I am not here to make friends. I have friends elsewhere. I'm here to work and have a transactional thing of I put in the work, I get a paycheck, then I go home and I do the things that actually gives me purpose. But I think in the United States, and I don't know really how long this has been the case, um, and I would think especially for men that work is supposed to be an all-encompassing aspect of not just purpose but also your identity. If I ask you, tell me about yourself, and I don't know you yet, our expectation in that interaction is you'll tell me about your work, right? Because that is supposed to be a super important identity, and it's supposed to be the place where you get purpose. I love my job. I think being a professor is one of the best jobs in the world. I get lots of purpose from that. I get lots of things from that, but it is not the most important thing that I do. It's not the most important role I play in my life. So I just think that that's another part of the workplace culture values is how much do people actually value work? Where do they put career on just sort of their list of priorities?
Mhm.
And I think that's a conversation that needs to happen more often as well.
Yeah. Thoughts and follow-up questions that come to mind for me, and you use that word value a ton, and I think that that and culture go hand in hand. From the leadership lens, we always talk about, like, you know, this idea of of clarifying your values and, fighting for alignment and making sure everyone's kind of moving in the same direction.
Mhm.
Um, and what I love about the concepts you're sharing or these thoughts are that essentially there's not a villain in it. There could just be mismatched values, and it's there's an organizational you know value at the top, and that doesn't mean that everybody in there has the same passion or mission. They, like you said, they may not need work to scratch the relational need or itch. It's like
Right.
it's more transactional in that mind or in their from where they're at. And so I guess
Hmm.
around the value piece, values to me values to me feel much deeper than what type of food and what type of music your culture likes. I think
Yeah, I call
that's
that preference.
preference,
Right.
and so that's low hanging fruit. But I think a lot of people, it's like, oh, I got to get to know them and understand them a little bit. Like, maybe we'll have a potluck where we represent, we bring in food from their culture, and that'll really help us
Mhm.
dive into understanding them more. But
Mhm.
it's going to be hard to tap into values when you're staying in the preferential space,
Sure.
is what it
Yeah,
feels like.
exactly.
And so,
Yep.
how do you have any thoughts around? Okay, how do you exercise authentic and genuine interest in trying to connect and understand um, someone else's values when they probably are much different to yours based on their background?
I mean, if you're serious about the work, then I would just spend some time immersed in the culture.
Hmm.
So, not just having cultural members be guests in your space, but go to their space and immerse yourself in it for a little while. Again, if you're serious about it, that's some of the best ways to really understand. Oh, this isn't just a value that they conjured up out of nowhere. These are values that are responses to the social and even physical geographic environment. It's necessary to have these values in this environment. So it's difficult to function well or even sometimes survive without these values here. So when they come to my environment where those, maybe some of those aspects in the environment aren't present, you're still going to bring those values there, right? And so it helps to really uh, be a guest in the other culture that you're trying to understand, rather than always have the cultural members feel as though they're guests in your space where you have control and you know
Hmm. Yeah.
you understand how everything works. um, and it would be difficult if you had a whole host of several different cultures. So if you have a very multinational, multicultural group, a lot of those things of just having conversations about what are the things that you value, what are some of the things that you feel that you need that you're not getting. How can we not just align you with us, but us with you, right? So how can we figure out a way to make this work for you? And just like any, these are all relationships, right? This is just a type of relationship. It's not romantic relationship, it's a workplace relationship. But just like, any type of relationship, you just have to be aware that sometimes it's just not going to work. It's just not going to fit. And so everyone just needs to take that on as just like, it's not that someone is failing at their job necessarily. If their values don't fit with the job, that's just not supposed to happen, right? That's just not a fit that should be happening. And hopefully respecting each other enough that, like, okay, this doesn't fit, so um you know I will help the next, if before I leave, I'm going to help the next person get settled in, or before an employee leaves, like helping them with finding some place that has a good fit. So that mutual respect and mutual support can go a really long way. And just what you said was is right on, that you try to bring the evaluative good guy bad guy thinking you just leave that off the table.
Hmm.
It is like, it's just there's this and there's this. It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And just what are you going to do about that? What are you going to do with this these conflicting values? You
Hmm.
don't have to alter everything you do in your organization to fit all these idiosyncratic values of each person. That's just not realistic. And I think that mature adults and even some mature teenagers and children should understand that you just can't do that. But the leadership needs to have a very clear and honest um, communication of this is the thing we're doing here, and this is what we value, so that when people come to that organization, they're not blindsided by, you know, you said you're into community building, but you're just here to make money, right? It's those kinds of things that are just not going to work
Hmm.
when there's lack of transparency or honesty in what the values are. There's tons of ways to assess values and attitudes and opinions. Just lots of things out there that people can do to gain cultural competency, and even some of these sort of personality tests that you can do. So I would strongly encourage any organization who's serious about making a positive workplace culture to take the time to look into some of these ways of getting that information out into the open to talk about.
Mm. Yeah, I love the this idea of leveling the playing field, and there's not a good cop, bad cop, right? It's like it's this idea of there's just nuance, there's variety, and there's I think there's space for variety. You don't have to, um, you know, I'm here. Leaders need to decide. Um, how serious are we about this? Are we just checking a HR box, or are we actually do we actually want to have a thriving, robust culture, um, within the organization, and even just that, some of the language when we're talking about values and when we're talking about who we are and what we're about, like authenticity is everything, right? So it's like saying, it, you walk in businesses all the time, and they're the values are up on the wall, but are those values in the hearts of the people there? I mean,
Sure.
sometimes I wonder if that's some of the biggest distance in the universe is maybe from what it says on the wall to what's really going on,
Yep.
what's not on the job description, what's not on that mission statement that's happening. And so, how do we, or so leaders need to be asking, like, how serious are we about our values? Are they genuine? Do we really know who we are and what we're about? And then how do we tap into our people probably early on in the onboarding process to understand if they're going to be a good fit or not, and
Hmm.
not to oversell a value that's not reality, that's not helping anybody. We might, that's probably where retention and turnover come into play, whenever there's misalignment there. And so
Yeah.
tapping in the early stages of people's value and it being authentic,
Hmm.
because I'm sure for the people too who, to your example earlier of another company from another country kind of coming in, from China to Ohio, and there's I'm sure this misconception too of like, hey, we've got to. Um, I don't know that it's been modeled well for them that their values are always welcome.
Hmm.
It's like
Hmm.
they've got to come in and they've got to conform. I've got to pretend that I don't have a value. So how do we genuinely approach people who um, are from different cultures and have different backgrounds and experiences, and how do we tap into that with authenticity? Or I love what you said earlier, if they're really serious about it,
Yeah.
not just not just for maybe selfish gain and selfish reasons, but are we legitimately serious about that? Because I'm sure they can sniff other cultures have been in situations where maybe that's been presented as was an authentic pursuit, but it
Sure.
wasn't truly an authentic pursuit, and
Oh
I'm
yeah.
sure that they can see through that and shoot holes in that real fast. Any
Talk
thoughts
to
on that?
Yeah, talk to any nonprofit group, and they'll tell you that whoever you're serving will absolutely know if you're parachuting in and
Mhm.
jumping out of there real fast. So yeah, I mean, it's a hard conversation because we are so immersed in our culture and our values. It's so much of who we are and what we are that it's difficult for us to consider giving any of that up. Um, you know, tell some Americans, uh, this 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 workplace would be a lot better if you gave up some of your freedom. They'll all be out, right? That's the wrong thing to say.
The wrong word to use.
That's the wrong word to use. Yes. Knowing what the vocabulary is for what those values are, knowing that there are emotional connections to these values, and similarly, like the value of family just is so important to so many cultures around the world that similarly this would be a lot better if you would just work here longer and maybe give up a little bit of your family time is just as insulting and just as upsetting as telling Americans that you have to give up some of your freedom. So that is something that just needs to be understood, just general vocabulary of cultural differences, not making any assumptions that a cultural member has those values. And that's why I kind of like just straight up, just what are the things that you value, and just getting people to tell you what they value, and then looking for trends in those among your employees and leadership as well. But it's just you've got to carefully assess that. It doesn't have to be, fill out this survey. You can do it that way, but it could simply just be let's talk about the things that we all value, right? Let's just put it all out on the table. And there's been several times when at our university where there'll be initiatives, and I'll say, what is the success metric? So success metric would be the thing that you count up to demonstrate that you've been successful, right? So that could be tuition dollars, that could be the number of people we graduate, the percent of students we retain. It could be a quality measure based on learning. And so I often challenge leadership that they're higher up than me. There's many, many layers to university leadership that a lot of people don't know about. So associate chair is pretty low in that group of administrators, but I do talk to a lot of upper administration, and I'll just say, what is the thing that we're actually shooting for here? Like, what is the metric that we're using to determine whether or not this thing we're doing is successful? And then I add to that, it's better if you say what it actually is than saying what you think I want to hear. If the bottom line of your success metric of your organization is profits, then you just need to say that, right? And people hopefully will understand, like, that is the thing that we need to demonstrate that we are successful. If that's the thing you're counting up, then the people you bring in should value that. But if it's not that, if it's something else, the number of people that you serve, the approach to that is completely different than if you're going for a financial bottom line. I realize that finances, money, funding is a necessary thing for many people, for many organizations, almost all organizations. It's just, is that your success metric, or is that just something that it's a tool to get you to where you need to be for your success metric? That's something that organizations need to have a very hard and honest look at. What do we actually value here? What are we actually counting up to demonstrate that we're doing a great job, right? And if your employees are you say what you value is a workplace culture that feels like family, but they can see that you're constantly paying attention to how much profits are coming in. They're gonna start wondering about you, wondering about your honesty, and that's not a good place to be.
Mhm. Yeah, and having, just the respect of your people to clearly state what it is, and then they can choose to be part of that or not, right? It's like,
Yep.
I don't wanna get them here, and then I have to tell them what I think they wanna hear, but over he that disconnect between you use administration, like, top level leaders and then the boots on the ground, like,
Hmm.
if you're saying it's about, we'll use profitability as an example. If that's what we say we're about, is that also being experienced in the frontline worker? In all the way down to the new person that's being onboarded. Do they have that same kind of clarity, or is there two different visions based on where you land in the org chart, or
Sure.
20 different visions,
Yep.
or values?
Yep.
And so that's just having that organizational alignment. It feels a lot like it comes down to some taking intentional time to authentically lay that out and then communicate that and um, be genuine to that, be accountable to that. So I know we talked about some of the cultural differences. Can we spend a little bit of time talking about more age differences? We're talking about
Sure.
leaders, and I know some of our leaders that are listening, um, they might be younger on the as far as in their career. Um, they may be in their early 20s, but they've been in an organization for some time, and then all of a sudden they're trying to lead someone that's, maybe 10, 15, 20 years older than them. And so I guess, can you speak a little bit into how can you effectively lead across age gaps as well?
Yeah. So really, just any leader, anyone who's going to take on that position at the organization, really needs to have, again, a good, deep, and honest look at why are you wanting to be a leader at this organization.
Mhm.
And becoming a leader often has benefits. It has usually financial benefits, usually get a raise, could have status benefits, and possibly intangible things like maybe more respect at the organization. So it's really not usually a big mystery why someone might be want to become a leader for those reasons. But unfortunately, those are kind of bad reasons to become a leader. You're becoming a leader because I'll get more money and respect and you know uh, a better office. Those are just not good reasons to become a leader. So I think everyone needs to just take a very good look at, why do you want to be a leader at that organization? What credentials do you have? What experience do you have? And do you have leadership qualities and leadership experience already that will sort of feed into that? And if your reasons for doing so are maybe not the best reasons, um, or you haven't been there very long and you're sort of jumping into leadership, I would certainly say that that's probably not it's not a good time for you to be doing that. It's probably a time to be getting experience and figuring out how things operate at the organization. Um, so you were talking about before, some organizations where uh, you know some of the employees may start getting experience of the organization as a teenager, and maybe taking a leadership position in their early or mid 20s. That would certainly be different than if they're just jumping in their early to mid 20s in the organization and trying to become a leader there. You really haven't gotten the um, sort of social capital of people, you know, understanding why you should be the leader, because you know, a big part of being a leader is that you have to have people following, right? Whatever leadership position you take on, a leader can't be a leader without followers. And so you need to really understand, why do people follow leaders in the first place? And if you're not possessing the types of qualities that make people want to follow anybody, then that would be something that you'd want to start developing. Um, So that's just the first thing I'm going to say. Just like, are you in a good place to become a leader in the first place? And that's really for everybody, no matter how old you are. The other thing is just if you're young, especially, but I think this applies to everybody, and your employees or your followers are your peers, so same aged, um, you need to do a lot of careful, reflection about boundaries between friendships and your actual leadership role at that organization. So I'm not saying that you have to be distant and never involved in anyone's life at all, but you just have to be careful that those friendships don't seem like favoritism to other people at the organization. That's just something I would caution about. Um, and then if you are in a leadership position where someone is older than you, um, one thing you definitely want to ask is, has this older person, so they're chronologically older than you, have they been there longer than you at that organization or not? Right. So some people can jump into organizations at any age. If they've been there longer than you, and I'm in a leadership position right now, that the associate chair and the chair of the department, both of us have been here about the same amount of time. And we have professors who've been here longer than us and professors who have not been here longer than us. And in those cases, we want to be respectful to the expertise and experience of people who have been here longer than us, so that we can understand the sort of historical timeline of what's gone on through this the length of this organization. And in our case, it's our department. What were some of the highlights and some of the tragedies that happened in this department, to have a better understanding of not just what works and what doesn't work, but people's perceptions of what works and what doesn't work, because that's something that you really need to. The biggest sort of all-encompassing thing about psychology that I tell everyone is everyone's reality is kind of their own, and so perceptions are almost more important than objective truths when it comes to understanding people.
Mm.
People are belief-driven creatures, and so you really have to get at what do they believe to be true rather than what is actually true. And that's really the bare bones idea of understanding human beings.
Mm-hmm.
So do the older employees, especially those who've been there longer, are they willing to sort of co-sign you being a leader in that organization? They're willing to say, yes, please take on these leadership roles and leadership tasks. I don't want them, because not everybody wants to take on a leadership position like that. So these are all things that, don't go in and assume. You really just have to ask around and maybe even formally assess. But these are all things that you really need to consider carefully before you take on a leadership role. And then as you're in that leadership role, you need to think about, I need to navigate these relationships in a way that maintains my sort of leadership role and status in that sense, but also respecting what other people are contributing to inform my decisions as a leader in that organization.
I just hear a ton of overlap in the cultural sensitivities, of being open and curious in an authentic way. And then also this, to where when you talk about, there's an element, if you're a younger leader, I think a great question, are you leading in a way and connecting in a way with people where you honor their tenure? If they've been here for much longer than you, have you approached them and just out of curiosity, hey, what was it like before I got here?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about your history. How did you get here? Just taking a genuine curiosity. And I find that curiosity is extremely disarming. And so
Sure.
if you have a genuine interest, most people aren't going to say, shut up and get away from me. It's like, oh, you're taking interest in me. That feels nice. This is someone that I want to connect with and understand more. And what a what a foundation to lay relationally to then be able to say and speak into your own values. Hey, I know I'm
Hmm.
only 24, 25, but here's where I want to be in 10 years. Here's what I'm after, you know? Um,
Hmm.
and just opening that conversation and allowing that to be two-sided, not just I'm here to take charge, move out of the way, I'm coming for you, I'm on your heels. It's more collaborative, it's more open, it's more, but again, it's got to be done authentically or it's gonna fall on its face. So kind of the second section that I think would be really helpful for us to hear about is this idea, and I know you've done research also around like goal motivation and how do we pursue productivity. I know that that can have a lot of different definitions. Every organization talks about goals, and they need to be smart. They need to be you know measurable and metrics and all the things. And so, how would you define goal motivation for us, just at a high level? Um,
Hmm.
or a kind of an overview, and I've got some follow-up questions around that I think will help our leaders for them to hear from you.
Yeah. So, first of all, the sort of mass marketed process of approaching goals, most of those I think are great. If you're doing SWOT analysis or SMART goals, I have zero problem with any of those. So I would say keep doing those. But I would say that in social psychology, the dominant theory that is out there that really helps us understand motivation is called self determination theory. These are three psychological needs that people have, and differing people have differing levels of these psychological needs. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So, and different cultures emphasize these psychological needs differently. So, just as humans have physical needs, we need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to drink water, and so on and so forth. We also have these psychological needs that if we're not getting those things, then we're not going to be motivated to do it. So we need to feel that our what we do is self-driven, right? We feel like we chose that somehow. It's stemming from us personally. So that's autonomy. And some people are more interested in autonomy than others. Some cultures, including the United States, are more interested in sort of autonomy than personal autonomy than other cultures. Um, but that's a need that all humans have. It's of some degree. Competence, meaning you need to feel like you can understand the tasks that are in front of you and you can navigate your environment fairly successfully. That's something that people feel they need to do. If I'm going to give Derek a task and say, all right, so I'm gonna have you do this, but I'm gonna constantly tell you what you're doing wrong. That's going to make him not very motivated to do it again because it's not feeding the need of competency. And relatedness is the need to feel connected to others. Um, you know, Human beings are social creatures, and we need to feel connected to other people. And so you need to make sure that your environment that you're giving them is something that allows them to feel connected to others in some way.
Hmm.
So a workplace can supply those needs very well. And those workplaces, I would assume, just based on the research, the extensive research on self determination theory, is going to be a highly successful workplace that supplies all three needs. And I'm sure we've heard horror stories about, and maybe some of us have our own horror stories about workplace environments that um, made you just do what they said. They made you feel like you were incompetent and that isolated you from talking to other people. If it was one or any or all of those things, and you uh, probably came home feeling pretty drained, just like you're being starved of your psychological needs. It's soul crushing to be in an environment that supplies none of your psychological needs. So the thing that the sort of SWOT analysis, SMART goals, a lot of the approaches miss is the psychological needs that are being fulfilled by coming into work, right? Are people motivated to come to work are they going to be getting these things from that experience? If not, they're going to be less motivated to do the kinds of work that you're needing them to do. So work with human beings as they are built, and work with trying to have them have some input into what they do. That's called autonomy support. Give them, if they're not very good at something, and maybe they admit they're not very good at something, training can help, but it's sort of like you need to give them early and low level wins for them to feel like they're getting it and feeling more competent. And loneliness, I assume you've talked about this before. Loneliness is the unspoken epidemic of the United States. We are extremely lonely in this culture. And so it's very important that your organization addresses that. If you have Western cultural members, and especially Americans, there's just an extreme sense of loneliness for a lot of people. They can go to work and be surrounded by 30 people and still feel lonely because they're not making connections with any of them. So if there's barriers from people being allowed to make those connections, that's going to steal their psychological needs. It's no different than starving them from food. It's just you're starving them from something that they actually need, and it's going to make them want to go to work. So my own personal research looks at the combination of autonomy and relatedness. And it's when you are working sort of collaboratively with others on a project, on a goal, and they value it just as much as you do, and you're kind of going side by side. That kind of relational motivation is very motivating for a lot of people, because sometimes we go to work, and sometimes we go to school, and sometimes we go to church because of the people who are there, right? Because we want to see the people who are there. A lot of times I joke around, like, if you stuck someone in a football stadium all by themselves, they would hate it and they would never come back, because so much of that experience is hanging out with your friends. I always laugh at how much people don't pay attention to the game. Like just hanging out with their friends in the context of that. So it's similar to any environment. Like, people will not be motivated if they don't have that sort of psychological nourishment for coming back and doing a good job.
Well, and there's an element. The most recent data is around 85 to 90% of people are disengaged in the workplace, and I would imagine a big percentage of that's probably connected to one of these three that aren't being prioritized or experienced. If someone's not feeling like their psychological needs are getting met, you hear toxic workplace thrown out there a lot, and so do you kind of see a connection between kind of a toxic workplace and maybe some of these being maybe not directly violated, but maybe sometimes, where you talked about, hey, it's like I'm going to isolate people. It's maybe a little bit more vindictive.
Sure.
So do you feel like this has a connection with toxic workplace?
Yeah. So I would say, just like anything else, there's sort of there's toxic workplaces, and there are toxic relationships that are legitimately that way. And sometimes it's just, it wasn't a good fit, and you're just blaming the other side for why it didn't fit. So I think if you're, taking a good, like, clear look at it, sometimes it's just that just wasn't a good, relationship, workplace connection or fit. So I would just, in those cases, just like, they didn't value what I valued, and that's just, so be it. But in workplace environments, there's another psychological term that's taken off lately that I think everyone should be familiar with. It's called the dark triad of personality traits, which sounds so cool. It's all like the dark side.
Yeah.
A dark triad
of
dark triad of personality traits. And if your workplace has a lot of people who have these dark triad traits, that would be something that absolutely will create a toxic workplace environment. So the three are narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy.
Mhm.
So narcissism, everyone thinks they're better than everyone else and deserve more than everyone else. Machiavellianism is you're sort of manipulative, and I think that you know you can manipulate people with money. Like you're not going to get a raise unless you do this, or you could say isolate people in some ways and manipulate them that way. And psychopathy is not like horror movie psychopathy. It's more just the person is extremely impulsive. They often break the rules. They're often callous to other people's needs or even harm. So some people have all three of those lovely traits, but some people just have one or two of those. The more that that is present in at your organization, so leadership, very, very bad for that to happen. But also you think about like people stealing from work and whatnot, there's probably some of that going on there as well. So the good news is the dark triad can be assessed, and that's something that could be brought into some recruitment and sort of onboarding processes is trying to probe for those kinds of qualities. But those are the kinds of things that you absolutely want to avoid. And I think the
Mhm.
problem is um, people who come in and sort of, you know, say they're going to do a great job. They're super confident, and they sort of they reward people for allowing them to get higher status. So they manipulate the situation that way, um, and they take a lot of sort of impulsive risks that sometimes pay off. Some individuals like that seem like they might actually be good leaders. They're sort of charismatic, and people sometimes are drawn to that. But if that's the kind of environment you're in, I would just get out of it because it's not going
Run.
to work out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and if you need to just wash your hands in, just like this place is a not good fit for me because I do not want to be working for someone who's a dark triad
Mhm.
leader.
Sure.
That's just not
Yeah.
a good idea.
Yeah.
Dark triad leaders may be successful in lots of ways that, and some definitions of success. Some of these things, you know, breaking the rules sometimes can get you more money and more profits. But that's not the kind of thing that you want to be involved in. You just don't
Yeah.
want to be in that
Yeah.
kind of environment. You don't want to be in any kind of relationship like that. I just, I tell my
Yeah.
students, when I teach them about the dark triad, I'm like, we could invent a dating site right now and have dark triad probing as one of the main things, and we would be very
You'd
successful.
have a Netflix documentary in no
Yeah,
time.
we weed out all the dark triad people.
Yeah.
It'd be like really
Well, and
cool.
I would imagine a high level leader probably, like specifically the one that gravitated toward more of the narcissistic bent. They probably don't want people underneath them having that bent. There's not enough room for everyone to share the same oxygen in that.
Yeah.
And so I guess too, from let's say that you're a leader that's not leading in that way, and you see someone maybe in the lower ranks in the organization that seems to have some of those qualities. And again, back to kind of some of the more narcissistic side of things, at least in my arena, narcissism and some of those personality disorders, man, there's, that's the least likely probability for success when it comes to psychotherapy, right? And so,
Mm.
I know that there's a difference in narcissism and narcissistic tendencies. I think culturally, a lot of people paint a broad brush and call everybody a narcissist, but it's very
Right.
rare. But the
Mm.
narcissistic tendencies are there, and so I
Sure.
think just for a high level leader recognizing that what's the state of the business and the season that we're in, if we have a lot of this happening, I would just again, back to your fit conversation, like it may be worth us moving in a different direction because I could see some people who are demonstrating those qualities of that's probably not going to be an easy fix. It's not going to be
Right.
something an easy shift to to fix them or repair them. And so I guess would just caution leaders, and if you want to add anything to that, just
Sure.
caution leaders, like if you see that in your culture, you may have to step in and really protect your culture.
And I think that people know that these are bad things, like
Mhm.
oftentimes, but I think that um, having these qualities, at least in our culture, sort of capitalism being the way that we do things, it can get you pretty far in this culture. These qualities. So someone might seem successful, but then they also have these dark triad traits. And so there's, I think, understanding that this person has been up until now rewarded for being this way,
Mm,
right? And so, dark triad makes them sound like, super villain, right? It's just like even calling those traits that.
yep.
But just take it as it is. It's like this person is extremely just dysfunctional in this kind of environment, and you know how to resolve that those years and years of being rewarded for being super overly confident, or rewarding all the right people and manipulating your way to the top, stepping on people and never saying you're sorry, and never making amends with that. Like, unfortunately, those actions can build and raise you up to a higher status. But oh my gosh, it's just so bad. It's so dysfunctional and toxic to be that way. So I think a lot of it is you have to try to nip it in the bud, and
Hmm.
hopefully, I don't know if there is a way to fix that at the workplace level. I
Hmm.
think that needs to happen somewhere else,
Yep.
at a personal, long term relational level,
Hmm.
whether that's with a psychotherapist or with just the right kind
Yep.
of person.
Yep.
Um, so I don't know if the workplace should feel compelled to fix that, but I think they should feel compelled to address that, right?
Yep. Big difference,
Um,
right? Yep.
yeah,
And knowing knowing it may go beyond your scope,
yeah,
as a leader. Leaders create culture, and they're the preservers, and I love, addressing it. It's really about protecting your culture and protecting your um what you want to build. And I think for leaders, when they're thinking of these things, it's like when you're looking at your team, recognize that as a leader, this doesn't all fall on you. There's resources and industrial psychologists and workplace support that you can get to do this. And so I know that can feel super overwhelming, and you don't do anything because you don't know where to start. So I want to say that first. But as you're looking at your people, also, I always think a great check is what I want to replicate this leader. When it comes to their how they're going about not only their work and productivity, because like you said, they can be productive based on what their role is, but they could also have a huge negative impact on those that are on their team or around them. It may not always show up like it's being a detriment to the bottom line, but it might be a detriment to the culture. And so
sure.
just leaders to be mindful of that. And so last question I have. I know we've talked a lot about leaders and the choices and decisions they make as far as protecting culture and preserving culture. Um, what what would you speak into kind of the other side of it, of people on your team who are wanting to follow high level leaders? Like what's in the research, or what comes to mind when you think about that?
So really, just uh, for a very long time, the conversations, both scholarly and in organizations, that have taken place about what makes things work, has focused a lot on leadership. But within the past 20 years, a new concept of followership has started to come into play, where a leader cannot be a leader without having followers, right? So a followership is really understanding why people would want to follow a leader. And this kind of research is really brand new. It's something that scholars have just begun to really dive into. And if you really want to have an advantage over other organizations, I would strongly encourage everybody in a leadership position to maybe take a break from learning more about leaders and more about understanding what makes people want to follow leaders and immersing yourself more in the followership literature. So it's not going to hit the mainstream probably for another 50 years of that term and that concept. So I would start, grasping as many scholarly resources as you can on followership, and you'll definitely have an advantage there.
What a way to get a leg up on the competition and your competitors to be kind of thinking through more of that lens alongside leadership, but also thinking about the follow. I love what you said of like leaders got to have followers, and what makes a leader worthy of being followed. And so that's an interesting field of research. So, is there one thing right now that you're researching that we didn't talk about that you're interested in?
I got a couple real fun ones. The one of the more fun ones is what I call the good guy bad guy fallacy.
Mm.
It's when two groups are in conflict with each other. If you learn that one of them is not such a good person or not such a good group, without any additional information, you'll assume the other side is not so bad,
Mm. Mm.
almost the good guy. So a good guy, bad guy fallacy is sort of an approach to understanding conflict and the beginning of taking sides in a conflict. That we assume that two people in disagreement or in conflict has to be composed of a good guy, bad guy. So we start searching for that, rather than just thinking about those two sides. Those could be two good guys or two bad guys, and they're just
Mm.
in conflict with each other. So we don't probe enough for information about both sides to understand what the conflict is even about.
Yeah.
And I think like marriage counselors do a good job of not falling into that pit. But we all need to work on doing that in our current climate of many conflicts at many levels.
Mm-hmm.
Especially in an election year,
I
you
was
just have
going
to
to
be
say,
cautious about the good guy, bad guy fallacy coming into play about many people.
Yep. Those political debates, they definitely don't adhere to what you just said of having, not wanting to put them a good guy, bad guy.
But it's gonna feed my research so well, right?
Yep. It's
It's
very timely.
gonna show the phenomenon for sure.
Yep. Well, thank you for your time. And like I said, I know you're going to have a lot of listeners who are going to benefit from this. So thank you.
Thanks, Derek. Always
Yes,
a
sir.
pleasure.
Yes, sir.
Good to see you.